Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "You have heard that it was said, 'An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.' But I say to you, offer no resistance to one who is evil. When someone strikes you on your right cheek, turn the other one as well. If anyone wants to go to law with you over your tunic, hand over your cloak as well. Should anyone press you into service for 1 mile, go for 2 miles. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn your back on one who wants to borrow. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your heavenly Father. For he makes his sun rise on the bad and the good, and causes rain to fall on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what recompense will you have? Do not the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brothers only, what is unusual about that? Do not the pagans do the same? So be perfect, just as your heavenly Father is perfect." The Gospel of the Lord. This gospel always reminds me of something that happened early on in my priesthood. I was at visitation, and in the old translation, tax collectors were called publicans. And so after reading the gospel, I was talking about these words, and if I said to the people there, "If you love those who love you, what recompense will you have? Do not the Republicans do the same?" They didn't laugh. So I learned, you got to learn who your audience is. But instead of that phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, you have heard that it was said. This law of equal retaliation, if you will, comes to us from pre-Judaic times. This was Babylonian law, and the code of Hammurabi, you may remember from your history lessons. While to us, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth sounds more like those countries where they cut off the hands of a thief to punish him for stealing, the origins of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life, were so that you could not overkill your revenge, if you will. So if you put out somebody's eye, the only lawful thing to do back to you was to put out your one eye, not both of your eyes and most of your teeth. It was meant to be an early form of justice in the ancient world. The same with love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Jesus tells us, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Both of these sayings are in the Hebrew Scriptures, but Jesus has a different way of looking at things. Someone strikes you on one cheek, turn and offer him the other one. Someone presses you into service for a mile. It could be that a Roman soldier, for instance, would make you carry some of his armor or something, press you into service for 1 mile. That's what that means. Jesus says, give him 2 miles, and so on. The Western world has been greatly influenced by Christianity. And by the Western world, I mean Europe and North and South America. The Eastern world, outside of the Orthodox countries, Greece and Romania and Russia and all of that, those parts of the world where Christianity has not had much of an influence still go by the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. To us, it seems almost barbaric to think about putting out somebody's eye in retaliation. The system of laws that we have that began as Europe coalesced as a continent with the various different countries that are there, and a lot of the practices of law came to our own country. You know, if somebody puts your eye out now, you can take them to court, and in our country, they are protected by the amendment to the Constitution against cruel and unusual punishments. So I like to think that over time, this eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing has been mitigated by Christ's influence in our world. That slowly, over centuries, we have developed a system of laws that are meant to protect us as individuals, but also meant to mete out just punishments for those who assault us or steal from us or whatever. And the same as England, Europe, United States, Canada, all of us have been influenced by these teachings of Christ, and we strive for a more just society. Even about how we treat our enemies, the Geneva Conventions, and all of those things, we did not treat the Germans, the Nazis, the same way they treated everybody else during the Second World War. We strive for a more just society. And so, being a priest, maybe it's just part of my vocation, but I like to give Christ the credit for that. And all of these centuries worth of people who have come before us, who have cooperated with the grace that Christ pours out upon the world. The reason I go through all of this here with you today is to remember the mustard seed, the tiny little seed that becomes a big plant. And that's all because of the grace of God active in our world. We are that mustard seed. As long as we are receptive to that grace, God can take the littlest things that we do and turn them into big things. God does all the work. All we have to do is let ourselves be used by him. And who knows what further developments there could be in civilization if more and more people would just simply tune in to the words and teachings of Jesus Christ.